Hey everyone, Happy New Year, and we want to say Happy New Year and welcome to the very first Radiotopia Presents of 2024. It's a series that we are truly excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Now, this is from documentarian Jess Shane, who put out an open call on Craigslist and then worked with 4 strangers to explore the standard rules that documentarians and journalists use to tell their subject stories. So the series gets into all sorts of questions about what happens when people's real lives are collected, edited, and consumed. The show pulls back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows. And then it turns in on itself and some really interesting twists and turns along the way in the making of the show. I've gotten to know Jess a little bit over the making of this show. Every time I chat with her, there's a new wrinkle to this story. It is really incredible. So go check out the new Radiotopia Presents series, Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. It is out now on your favorite podcast platform. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, February 2nd, 1920, Warren G. Harding writes a letter that contains a very curious proposal. The letter was to Carrie Fulton Phillips, the woman he had been having an affair with on and off for the better part of 15 years or so. And over those 15 years, Harding's political star was steadily rising. And by February 1920, he was a senator from Ohio, perhaps with an eye on an even higher office. But he knew that this affair, if it went public, might doom his chances. So he wrote this letter in which he offered one of 2 proposals to Carrie Phillips in return for her silence. One option, he would resign at the end of his senatorial term and not return to Marion, Ohio, where they had met. And the other option was that he would pay her $5,000 a year each March for as long as he remained in public service. Warren Harding, of course, did stay in public service. He would go on to be elected president that fall, take office in 1921. He would serve for only 2 years before dying in office and is largely considered one of the worst presidents. He was very corrupt and ineffective, very anti-immigrant. That's another parallel that we may not get into in this episode, but let's focus on the letters and this affair. And to do that is, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia. Hello, Niki.
Hello, Jody. I want this whole episode to just be a dramatic reading of these love letters.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of them, and they're very good.
Well, and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley is here as well. Hello, Kellie.
Hello.
And yeah, I mean, I asked you guys, did you get my email where I asked you to bring, everyone's going to do a reading from their own romantic letters that they've sent?
No.
Yeah,
they're all on text now. So.
Yeah, mine are all just those Gmail like auto replies. Like, sounds good. Please put it on my calendar. Like, that's as good as it gets for me.
Oh God!
But
so romantic.
Yes, but let's start actually with what's in those letters. And Niki, that letter specifically, February 2nd, that he writes, it's kind of actually one of the final letters that they write because they have reached this point where it's like, we got to figure out what's going to happen here so that this doesn't go public. Help me understand Harding's proposal here, these 2 deals that he's offering. One, I'll pay you to stay silent kind of makes sense. But this other one of I will retire and give up my public life, why is he making this proposal in this way?
Yeah, this is the most businesslike of the letters between the 2 of them. But he's really worried that she's going to come forward. She has come to him. We don't have her letter, but just from the context of his letter, that she has asked for more money than he actually has. And if he doesn't give it to her, she's going to come forward. So he's in this position where, like, she can either come forward or he can pay her a smaller sum. And so realizing that one very possible outcome is that she comes forward with all of his letters and says, we've been having an affair for 15 years, and how he believes that's going to kill his political career anyway. He asks her, look, if that's where we're going, then just let me finish my career in the Senate. I'll get out of the public spotlight. I won't have power anymore. I'll have given this up for you, and we'll just not make this a big to-do. Yeah. Or $5,000 a year, and she chooses door number 2.
Yes, you're right that it is very businesslike, and it comes down to a financial transaction. But Kellie, we should sort of paint a picture of the fact that, like, this was, as I said, a 15-year relationship, and it was very steamy and very intimate at times.
Scandalous. I mean, completely scandalous, especially given the fact that So Harding and Phillips meet in 1905. He's living in Marion, Ohio. He's editing one of the city's newspapers. And get this, she's the wife of one of his best friends, James Phillips, who's the owner of a dry goods store. And so the fact that this is not just some random woman, but his best friend's wife, I think that makes this all the more illicit.
I just want to throw in there, I feel like 80% of America prior to the year 1950 was an owner of a dry goods store. That was the only job that existed. But anyway.
My grandpa was the owner of a dry goods store.
See? But Kellie, keep telling us about this affair and sort of how it evolves over the years.
So the affair lasts off and on for about 15 years through Harding's term as the Ohio lieutenant governor and then through his term as a U.S. senator. So shortly after he wins the party's nomination for president, this is when Phillips threatens to release the correspondence demanding money in exchange for her silence. And so historians say that in order to keep her quiet, the Republican National Committee paid Phillips and her husband to just go away on a lengthy trip to Japan and then gave her a gift, we're going to put in quotes, between $20,000 to $25,000, which in today's money would be almost $300,000. So, the corruption doesn't just end with the scandal of the affair.
So he ropes the RNC as he becomes a sort of viable candidate. He ropes the sort of larger infrastructure into to do his dirty work, into his web of corruption. Interesting.
To do his dirty work, yeah, to send them away.
To put the person he's having an affair with and her husband on a cruise to Asia because they need him out of the country so that there isn't any sort of like blow up during the campaign. This is such a huge scandal. And I have to say, I, for one, love it.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the interesting things about this is we didn't really know about this for a long time, in part because the letters really are the evidence of this, and the letters were sealed, let's put it that way, for a long time. And we'll get to that in a sec. But Niki, I mean, I feel like I got to give you a chance to just talk about what's in the actual letters and the nature of the correspondence between these two, because it is something else.
Finally, yes, these letters are erotica. Like, they're explicit. He talks about Jerry, which is the name that he gives to his penis. He talks about her climbing Mount Jerry. It's always like the third person in the room in all of these letters. And it's kind of amazing. And he's actually a good writer. So it's like good erotica.
The professor side of you will always
recently
be
republished
there.
all these.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing because there is something... Because we tend to look at the past through very sepia-toned glasses, we feel kind of removed from the people from the 19-teens and the 1920s. But these are very modern letters in a way, because they're the kind of intimacy that is really familiar to those of us today, right? Because it's very human emotions and very modern language for talking about it.
Kellie, any thoughts on the letters themselves?
No, I'm good.
So as I gather,
I will say some of them are poems.
Yeah, they write. So they write poems to each other. I mean, yeah, there is this very fascinating correspondence, and it paints this really interesting picture of a very powerful person. And as I said, we don't have this picture for a long time because, as I gather, what happens is in the 1960s. Well, first off, the Harding family has a lot of incentives to kind of not talk about this, as we know, and there is hush money and all this stuff, so it doesn't really get out at the time. And then Harding leaves office, and it doesn't really come out. But then in the 1950s and 60s, biographers are looking into writing about Harding, and I guess this cache of letters is discovered, and the family of Warren Harding basically cuts a deal and says, we will give you access to us, and we'll cooperate with a biography, but these letters have to remain sealed for 50 years. And that is why it's not until very recently that these letters started to come out, and this started to paint this picture. And so, Kellie, I guess my question there is, it's so important to have a full picture of the people who run this country. And how much is this, is your sense that this is an anomaly and this sort of crazy scandal, or how much is it the case that, like, this sheltering of the image and this rehabilitation of image and this sort of hiding of stuff happens basically for every president.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds sad to say, but it feels kind of status quo. Like, I feel like the husbands that are sort of faithful to their wives are exceptional in a lot of ways. And I think, the story of sex and power is old and completely, cliche and familiar to a lot of Americans. But also the idea of the secrecy and the wanting to hide it and cover it up. We've seen this with, JFK. We've seen this with Cleveland. Is it Grover Cleveland that also has an affair?
Oh, Mama, where's my paw?
Yeah. I think Grover Cleveland is also having an affair. There are lots of presidents that are engaged. Bill Clinton, in these extramarital affairs and the things that they do to keep them hidden, is understandable to say the least. But I think, during Harding's presidency, I think we also have to acknowledge that I'm not convinced that the press would have necessarily gone to explode his entire life in the way that we would today. This is, pre-social media and a 24-hour news cycle. And I think people prefer to keep things in the bedroom.
Yeah, this is a really interesting moment for this to happen. So first of all, as Kellie had mentioned earlier, Harding is a newspaper publisher, and he cultivates very close relationships with the press. And you're also at the beginning of this shift away from yellow journalism and tabloid journalism to the rise of this quote-unquote objective journalism, the professional journalism, in which journalists, instead of sort of warring with presidents, were protecting their reputations. And so it's no surprise that not only is JFK protected, but FDR, LBJ, these were all presidents who were having affairs, but it wasn't considered right for these responsible newsmen to publish these salacious rumors, even though, and all of the people in the Senate, people knew that this was happening, but it wasn't considered proper fare for reporting.
Yeah.
So I will say this about President Harding is that the relationship that he had with Carrie Phillips was not the only. He had another mistress, Nan Britton, who wrote a tell-all about their relationship called The President's Daughter. And in it, she charges Harding as being the father of her child. She dedicates the book to all unwedded mothers, and really tries to give all of the tea, shall we say, in their relationship. This book was also seen as scandalous. It kind of backfired because I think people were also in this moment where they didn't want to know these stories and they didn't want to hear, these scandalous relationships, particularly from their political leaders. And so it didn't do her so well. But in the end, she does get redeemed in that in 2015, they did a DNA test and found out that indeed her daughter Elizabeth was the true daughter of Warren Harding.
And it also seems to be the case that just given what we end up seeing about the Harding presidency, this scandal may not have rated or broken through given all the other ways that he was such an awful president. And so maybe we should just, lay a little bit of that out there. But he is, up until maybe recently, often considered the worst president. Why is that?
Yeah, there were a lot of scandals during his presidency. Obviously, it started with this scandal with the woman he was having an affair with, but also it wasn't necessarily that Harding himself was engaged in a lot of corruption. I think the jury is still out on how much of this he knew about, but his administration, particularly the people in his cabinet, were self-dealing across the board. You've maybe heard of the Teapot Dome scandal. I don't think anyone really knows the ins and outs of it. And we don't need to get into them here, but the Teapot Dome scandal, which was the huge scandal of the early 20th century, that was the Harding administration. And a lot of that stuff comes out towards the end of his presidency and then after he dies. So it becomes the thing that everyone's talking about in that legacy building moment after his death.
I feel like after tarnishing his reputation a little bit, I do want to say he does have some things that he does that are noteworthy. He's trying to, bring the country into a place of healing and stability after World War I. I think that he's also trying to, in very not so subtle ways talk about the racism within the South when he travels to Birmingham, Alabama, and he delivers a civil rights speech, so to speak, and he basically calls democracy a lie. Yeah. And then he talks about how he supported federal anti-lynching legislation. This is something that Woodrow Wilson, his predecessor, was unwilling to do. And then he also, commutes Eugene V. Debs' sentence, who's, a socialist leader who's serving a 10-year prison sentence for speaking out against the war in a workers' rally in Canton, Ohio. So he, in some ways, is also trying to stand up for the marginalized and the oppressed, which is noteworthy.
Yeah, I mean, it is really fascinating to see the ways in which his reputation has been rehabilitated a little bit. And I think it's, another lesson in you kind of play the hands you're dealt. And I mean, I don't think anyone thinks he was the most competent president, but he was also like entering at a really interesting moment. It's so much about the context in which you're operating as much as your personal capabilities. That said, I do want to point out that in Malcolm Gladwell's book, that Blink, he has, did you read that? I mean, I think a lot of people read it a long time ago, but he has a whole thing about Warren Harding in there. And his argument is basically that Warren Harding was so good looking that everyone was blinded to his failings and basically said, like, he's tall, dark, and handsome, let's make him president. And it was this, this very Gladwellian theory that, like we just make these judgments with the sort of unconscious parts of our brain, and then we get ourselves in real trouble. Have you recently looked at a photo of Warren Harding? Do you agree that he is so attractive that he would just cause people to just make him president without really evaluating his skills?
Look, Jody, handsomeness is a historical construct.
Yeah.
And so who knows? It seems that a lot of the ladies in the 19-teens and 20s liked Warren G. Harding. I'm not sold on Malcolm Gladwell's argument here. Kellie's dubious face at the moment suggests that she is not.
I can't. I mean, what I think it is? I think it's just power. I think people think power is sexy and position and authority is sexy. And if you've got some charisma behind that, you don't really have to be good looking. People are just drawn to the power.
And if you write a decent love letter,
right.
That helps a lot too. And then you're
if you got away with words.
I mean, listeners should Google it, but he does in the black and white photos look a little cadaverous.
Yeah, wow, cadaverous. Okay, so that listeners is your assignment. Hot or not, Warren G. Harding, and let us know. You can email us thisdaypod@gmail.com. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
Thank you.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. You can get in touch with us again, thisdaypod@gmail.com. There's also a contact form at thisdaypod.com. You can follow us on Twitter at thisdaypod or Instagram at thisdaypod. Are you noticing a trend here? Get in touch. We love hearing from you. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Radiotopia.